이번 과제의
Main focus of the task. 1. Brazing should be conducted according to the brazing standards. 2. It is important to figure out the melting point of the brazing rod depending on the size of the copper tube. 3. The brazed surface should be even and the silver brazing metal must be sufficiently applied to more than 2/3 of the expanded section. Please check the preparations and tools for this training.
주의사항
There should be no damage caused by brazing heat on the base, equipment, and component.
없어야 합니다.
Before and after the brazing work, competitors should open the valve to control the pressure of acetylene, oxygen, and nitrogen, and examine the connecting parts of torch, gauge, and hose with soapy water. Competitors must check whether the back fire protector is attached to the acetylene cylinder gauge. Competitors should always be safe when using a gas welder and make sure not to generate the black smoke when igniting spark. Competitors must always wear welding leather gloves when working. It is not allowed to carry a brazing torch around while it is ignited or leave the torch ignited for the upcoming work. During the brazing work, competitors should follow the nitrogen gas to prevent the oxidization inside the tube. After the brazing work, competitors should release the remaining gas inside the brazing torch and gauge. Competitors should make sure not to get burnt from the heated copper tube after the brazing work.
이번 과제에서
Please check what you are going to perform on this task. Basic brazing method.
방법을 훈련합니다.
Prepare necessary tools and materials for brazing, such as a gas welder. Check the pressure of oxygen, acetylene, and nitrogen. Control the pressure of the oxygen and acetylene gauge in the oxygen-acetylene gas welder. Adjust the pressure to 0.5 kilograms per centimeter squared for acetylene and 5 kilograms per centimeter squared for oxygen. Examine the connecting parts of gas torch and gauge hoses to check if there is any leakage using soapy water.
감사합니다.
Ignite the gas torch to neutral flame.
중성 불꽃으로 조절합니다.
After heating up the joint, braze it using a silver brazing rod. If the copper tube, which is the base metal, reaches the appropriate temperature, apply the silver brazing rod to the joint. As the end of the silver brazing rod gets melted down into the joint, the joining part is connected. Make sure the silver brazing metal does not overflow to the tube or any other components. Be sure the silver brazing metal is not deposited too widely. If the silver brazing metal is not deposited sufficiently, the brazed surface will not be even and the joint will not be connected properly. To produce properly brazed surfaces, the silver brazing metal must be sufficiently applied to more than 2/3 of the expanded section. If the flame is too strong or the copper tube is heated up too long, it can cause the copper tube, which is the base metal, to get melted. Therefore, competitors should be able to braze the tube in a short amount of time through practice. Before the brazing work, flow the nitrogen gas inside the copper tube. Afterwards, keep flowing the nitrogen gas as you perform the brazing work. Comparing two different copper tubes. One is brazed with flowing the nitrogen gas. The other is brazed without flowing the nitrogen gas. When you cut the brazed joint of the copper tube that is brazed without flowing the nitrogen gas, you can check its inner part is blackened. This is because the oxidation occurred inside the tube caused by the heat inflicted when brazing. If the oxidation occurs or any other impurities remain inside the tube, it can cause some problems in piping. When brazing pipes, it is necessary to flow the nitrogen gas. Basic brazing work for the refrigeration piping. Prepare necessary tools for brazing, such as a gas welder. Check the pressure of oxygen, acetylene, and nitrogen and control the pressure of each gauge. For the safety of the competitor, check whether the backfire protector is attached to the acetylene cylinder gauge. Examine the connecting parts of gas torch and gauge hoses to check if there is any leakage using soapy water. Open the nitrogen gauge and set the pressure to 0.2 kilograms per centimeter squared. Polish the joint of the copper tube. In order to enhance the fluidity of the brazing rod, wipe the exterior of pipes with sandpaper or nylon cloth. Competitors can wipe the interior of pipes with a piece of cloth or flow the nitrogen gas to remove impurities. In order to connect the tubes with the same radius without a socket, the joint of one tube must have been expanded with a tube expander for easier brazing. Insert the copper tube to be brazed into the expanded tube. When joining two copper tubes which have the same quality of the material, it is fine not to use flux. Fix the copper tube to be brazed with a vise. Posture for the brazing work. The competitors can take the most comfortable posture and fix the tube according to the desired posture. Flow nitrogen gas inside the copper tube to be brazed. Ignite the gas torch to neutral flame. Heat up the joining part. If there is a chance of overheating the tube due to its small diameter, heat it up with weak carburizing flame, while making sure not to melt the copper tube. The plenty of practice is required since competitors need to control the flame properly and heat the joint evenly. Conduct brazing using a brazing rod. If the copper tube, which is the base metal, reaches the appropriate temperature, apply the brazing rod to the joint. As the end of the brazing rod gets melted down into the joint, the joining part is connected. When brazing, be careful not to cause fire because of the flame. Competitors must always wear welding leather gloves when working. It is not allowed to carry a brazing torch around when it is ignited or leave the torch ignited for the upcoming work. Make sure not to get burnt from the heated copper tube after the brazing work. What is brazing? It is a technique of connecting two base metals by melting another metal or alloy which has a lower melting point than the base metal and applying heat without harming the base metal. Brazing is one of the most important processes in copper tube construction. It is used to connect tube to tube or tube to fittings used for welding. When flowing the brazing rod into the joint, check the connecting joint and fill in sufficient amount of brazing rod. Finalize the work by overlapping the start and the end of the joint for it to be airtight. However, make sure the deposited silver brazing metal does not overflow to the pipe or any other components. Be sure the deposited metal does not be applied too widely. If the heating temperature on the copper tubes is too low, the brazing rod will not melt, making it hard and time-consuming to join the metal. The principle of brazing. It makes use of wetting and capillary action. What is wetting? When liquid is in contact with a solid surface, the liquid spreads over the solid surface due to intermolecular interactions between the two. This is called wetting. If wetting does not occur, it is impossible to braze. For the wetting process to occur easily, the surface of the base metal should be clean without any corrosion or contamination, and needs proper solvent, brazing rod, and heating temperature. Capillary action refers to the ability of a liquid to flow in thin pipes or narrow spaces due to wetting. If the heating temperature is adequate and the gap between the joints is sufficiently small to make the cohesion within the liquid be weaker than the adhesive forces between the liquid and the solid, then the surface tension penetrates into capillary to draw up the brazing rod. On the other hand, if the heating temperature is inadequate and the gap between the joints is too wide to make the cohesion stronger than the adhesive forces, then the liquid surface in the capillary will fall down, causing the brazing rod to fall down as well. Therefore, when brazing, adequate heating temperature and the gap between the joints is very crucial. The most appropriate gap width is 0.04 to 0.2 millimeters for the capillary action to take place. When brazing is over, turn off the flame and wait until the brazing at the joint harden and be fixed. When brazing is over, lock the main gas valve and release the remaining gas in the torch and the gas hose. Brazing the actual refrigerant pipe of air conditioner. Check the part where the refrigerant pipe is dented and using a tube cutter with the right diameter, locate the cutting wheel, which plays a role of bladder, to the point where it is to be cut, and while rotating the cutter, cut the pipe. Copper tube used for refrigerant piping is thin and light, making it easy to be crushed by force. Cut both sides of the dented part. Measure the length of the part where it is dented and cut a new copper tube for replacement. Although the pipe is cut successfully, there might occur some distortion and burrs around the cut edge. Remove all distorted parts around the cut using a file and a reamer. Connect the yellow hose, which is a service hose of the manifold gauge, to the nitrogen gas cylinder. The nitrogen gas cylinder is highly pressured, so make sure to install a decompression device before using it. Connect each hose of the manifold and check whether the connecting points are secured according to regulations. Use soapy water to check for any leakage. Use a copper tube expander for expanding the tube. Connect a new copper tube to where it is cut and remove foreign substances attached around. If you conduct brazing on site, flame retardant curtains should be installed to prevent damages on tubes caused by torch fire. If you conduct brazing to connect parts that are vulnerable to high temperature, use a wet cloth to cool down the brazed parts and complete the work as quickly as possible. Before brazing, wear welding leather gloves and open the high-pressure valve of oxygen and acetylene cylinder to check the operating pressure. Open torch valve to ignite fire and control flare to neutral flame. Neutral flame is when the long wing-shaped white flame becomes shorter and the center of the flame is surrounded by blue-colored flame. When the tube or the part to be brazed is heated up sufficiently to reach the melting point of the brazing rod, start brazing. Even when you ventilate nitrogen gas into the refrigeration system, if there is any remaining air, you must not start brazing. You should start if the nitrogen gas is being ventilated thoroughly. Even when nitrogen is being ventilated, make sure you seal the entrance so that air does not go into the refrigeration system. After brazing is complete, lock the high-pressure valve of oxygen and acetylene cylinder and release the remaining gas in the torch and gas hoses. Check again the points of the task we've worked on in this training. In this training, we have learned the brazing work for refrigerant piping. Everyone, thank you for your hard work.